Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to today's webinar. One second, I've got a little feedback here, which I've got to solve, and then we will start. I'm sorry about that. I know what to do. Hold on, everybody, 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. I'm just pulling up my script here again, which got lost, so I'm sorry. Here we go. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so thank you for tuning in to today's webinar. I'm David Adler, the chairman and founder of BizBash, and I'm thrilled to introduce today's presenters, Alyssa Peltier and Taylor Bohn of Cvent. Alyssa is a manager of event marketing at Cvent. Since joining the team in 2016, she has led various customer-facing programs that include advocacy, feedback strategy, storytelling, and most recently, corporate event marketing. She currently manages a team responsible for the marketing and strategy of the company. Taylor Bohn is the senior event and technology analyst at Cvent and a member of the meetings and event team. She is responsible for all the management and implementation of all the Cvent technology utilized at the brand's flagship events. Taylor started her journey at Cvent as a client success consultant, where she became an expert on Cvent solutions and learned best practices for implementing their solutions to make events the best that they can be. Today, they will share more about a new breed of event professional, the event technologist, which is more important now than ever. But before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Be sure to tweet your webinar feedback with the hashtag #SmarterEvents to @BizBashLive events. We will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions in the Q&A tab right in the chat window, which you can see. I'm pointing at, I'm sure. At the conclusion of the webinar, the presentation will be available on demand, so you can check back on everything that we discussed today. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Alyssa and Taylor.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, David, for those great introductions. Like David said, my name is Alyssa Peltier. I am the manager, like he mentioned, of one of the newest teams here at Cvent, which is our corporate event marketing team. And just a little bit more detail on what that really entails. My team is responsible for the event marketing strategy, the audience generation, and then our integrated follow-up campaigns. And we focus our efforts really approximately on 30 of our top tier, most complex events, including those that we host, like our annual conference, and those that we attend. So IMEX, GBTA, Dreamforce are a couple of those examples. And as a result of the creation of this team, I've also played a major part in helping to shape the technology strategy for our own event programs, to not only ensure that we're leveraging our own Cvent technology for our events portfolio, but also ensuring that we're integrating into other third-party technologies that exist within our tech stack. So our marketing automation, our CRM, to name a few. I will now pass it over to Taylor, and she can give a little bit more detail about herself as well and how it pertains to the conversation we're going to be having here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Alyssa. Yeah, my name is Taylor Bohn. I'm our senior event technology analyst at Cvent. So kind of obviously the focus of today's webinar, super exciting to be kind of diving into my role a little bit. I'll be honest, my role kind of developed and is still developing, which is great in a few ways, and it definitely has some challenges, but I'm excited to kind of get into what that looks like. If you're interested in potentially rolling out an event technologist role at your own company, if you're interested in diving into the position itself. But ultimately, my role here at Cvent is to project manage and implement all of our technology that we use at our flagship events, our big ones being Cvent Connect, and then our Elite Meetings Alliance, and then some of our internal events as well. I will say with this kind of current climate that we're in, a lot of new and virtual type events have come up. So I think Alyssa and I can speak really well to that strategy and how we've acted in sort of a consultative way of how we can roll these events out. So super excited to be chatting with you guys today, and we'll kind of dive in. So just to kind of get you guys excited about what we're going to be diving into, this is just a quick glimpse at today's agenda. It's a pretty high-level one. I'll be honest with you, Alyssa and I both love to talk a lot. We're really passionate about this topic, and we'll definitely kind of go into some detail here. But we obviously are continuing to lead the charge of this event technology concept internally at Cvent, and we're hoping to kind of take you guys on a journey here today to discuss the latest really on the topic. So we'll get into what the event technologist is, and obviously a lot of this is subjective and different dependent on the organization. We'll go into some trends, defining the rise of the event technologist. We'll get into what the profile of that role looks like, some options and pros and cons on insourcing versus outsourcing, and then to wrap up, we'll dive into what it looks like if you are interested in exploring becoming an event technologist. And then we will open it up for Q&A at the end as well. And you can submit questions throughout. All right, and then just a quick housekeeping reminder. Let me just pull this up. There is going to be a survey after the webinar. I know David mentioned that. We've got a surprise coffee gift card waiting for you all at the end, so be sure to provide your feedback. It's good to hear the feedback, make sure that we are continuing to improve. So be sure to fill that out.
All right, so what is an event technologist? That's, I think, a great place to start. So to be fully transparent, and I think Taylor kind of alluded to this already, we're still trying to figure that one out because it's really still an emerging role, and the technology is still evolving. It wasn't really until our major flagship conference last year where we started to realize the number of titles that were checking in with tech or technology in the actual title. And that led us down this journey to dive a little bit deeper into how other organizations are adapting their structures to accommodate this new role. So, in lieu of just being event planner or event planning professional or, senior planner, we started to see planning event technology or, there's more of this segmented approach. So although we see that this event technologist role is still emerging in the events industry and isn't clearly defined, like I said, it generally involves the overseeing of some or all of the technology components, integrations, and data aspects of an event. Some technologists we're seeing are more specialized in particular event tech areas, for example, registration management or registration building, or mobile app development, whereas others are more generalists, like Taylor, for example. She knows kind of a little bit about everything when it comes to event technologies, and she's really at the helm of integrating all of those at a holistic level, less so at the very finite technical approach. I'll let Taylor kind of talk about what her take is on what it means to be an event technologist as well.
Yeah, and Alyssa kind of hit the nail on the head there. I'll be honest, though, I get asked this question all the time. When I tell people what I do for a living, I'll say, I'm an event technologist, and they're like, what is that? What I tell people really in response is what I think sounds simple. I'm responsible for the implementation and management of all of our event-related technology that we use at our flagship events. I work on delivering event analytics to really drive those actionable insights and really decision-making. Sounds simple, right? Well, there is so much more to the role, as we've kind of alluded to. There's a lot of gray area, too. As we saw with the rollout of an official event planner back in the day, there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of unknown and kind of, oh, well, you can handle this that we see. And of course, obviously, with technology, that literally means change. So it is constantly evolving and changing. So it is definitely something that we're seeing evolve. My own role day to day, especially we look at the current climate, who would have thought we'd be in this position now? So, my role now versus 2-3 months ago looks a little bit even different. So if you do work in events, if you don't currently, if you have a particular interest for the tech side of things, you should definitely consider the event technologist role. I know there's some good chat going on the chat about kind of it being a good place to be in with this current environment we're in. So this is a good place to be.
Yeah, we're a little short on Taylors right now, if I was being brutally honest. But let's pivot and go into a little bit of data here. So at the end of last year, Cvent conducted a research study in conjunction with one of our research providers that captured results from approximately 1,400 planner respondents. And so the next couple of slides will shed some light on what our findings were there related to the topic of event technology as a role within the industry. So the question that was presented was, do you feel confident in event technology? And the big headline here was that only 38% actually felt confident. And so what we're seeing here is that technology and its mastery is not necessarily a base skill for event planners. And truth be told, I'm actually surprised to see it was as high as it was, given that planners have so much to worry about: riveting content, programming, attendee satisfaction, budgets, on-site logistics. I'm probably speaking to the masses here, but at an event, the last thing that you have historically, or the planner has historically been thinking about, is the user experience of the mobile app interface. I mean, it's starting to get very in the weeds and very technical, but that is changing. You know, that's changing now. We're starting to see a pivot towards event technology, and people are starting to notice its importance, just like how, you know, event planners have emerged and kind of started taking their seat at that boardroom table, which is a topic that Cvent really likes to speak on, improving the ROI of their events. The event technologist is now emerging and evolving in the same capacity out of its need for importance and relevancy.
And then this next one here, kind of going more into the stats of that 38% that we just talked about, only 20% of those people actually consider themselves experts. Now, really my question here is, should event planners actually be experts in event technology? From my lens, being an event technologist, I think no. Honestly, I think, again, event planners kind of becomes a joke to even say this, but they have so much to worry about on a day-to-day basis. They should really be focusing on their main job. They should be project managing an event. They should be focused on that strategy and really driving home the ROI of the event. They shouldn't be focusing on the nuances of some of this technology. However, they do need to know enough. They need to know enough to make decisions based off of event technology. They need to be able to trust the data. And to be able to trust that data, you need to have kind of a baseline level understanding of what each piece does, what each piece of technology does, how it interacts with other pieces of technology, and kind of how that data comes to be. They also need to know enough to speak confidently about it to those who matter. It might be the main event planner, to Alyssa's point earlier, it might be that event planner that does have the seat and be conversing with the CEO or those executives. So they need to know enough to sort of relay the message and speak confidently about the data and the technology that's being used. And then most importantly, they need to know enough to make decisions based on that data. Ultimately, that's kind of what we're looking at. Is we're in a data-driven world right now, so being able to take that data and make actionable decisions off of it. And they need to be able to actually understand their event technology expert, not just kind of blindly pass the torch. Just like if you were to hire another person on your planning team to maybe handle all of your food and beverage, you wouldn't just pass it over and say, oh, I don't need to know anything. You would know enough, kind of pass the day in and day out of that task, but you would be ultimately informed and accountable for that. And then this next one here, this one I think is really interesting. There was a review of, I believe, 250 job postings, and 94% of those job postings for event professionals listed those top responsibilities as, which we all know are pretty basic: logistics, performance analysis, budget, vendor management, event marketing, sponsor recruitment, all the kind of basic stuff. Only 6% of those 250 jobs explicitly required expertise in digital tools. Again, I don't think this is necessarily surprising. We are definitely seeing a trend switch over to having a dedicated role for the event technologist. So I don't necessarily think you need to be an expert in digital tools by any means, but I think knowing that it's definitely leaning that way is interesting for sure.
All right, so let's dive into some of the trends that are leading to this rise and this emergence of the role itself, and how that 6% might grow essentially over time. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide too, so settle in. But we're in the 21st century. You know, technology is a requirement. People are craving it. People are expecting it. People love it or they hate it. But it's an expectation at this point of events, and that technology is going to be supporting them. So some of the trends that we're seeing that are defining and developing this specialized role revolve around the following. So data privacy and its regulations. I think a few years ago it was GDPR, and now we're in the CCPA era. If you don't know what those are, we have tons of resources on Cvent.com related to those things. But these are really regulations around data and its integrity, and requiring people with a fluency in data literacy to get involved in all facets of the organization, which now is including live event programs. And so, you know, planners who may not have historically felt plugged into the legal requirements of their events are now even more keenly aware of the data that they're collecting at every step of their event process, and technology is the backbone that supports that. Number two, similar to Taylor's role, we're starting to see less outsourcing and more internalization of specialists in the corporate environments to handle the management of these technologies and these processes. So again, this is of course budget dependent and organization specific, but in the corporate space specifically, where, you know, teams are expanding and meetings and events are continuing to grow, we are seeing that is a specialization is happening. So number three, the next trend that goes hand in hand with the one noted above is that in-house specialization is a direct reflection of the complexity that event tech now entails. Number four, events themselves are also becoming more immersive and personalized and interactive in scope. So we're seeing technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality take live events by storm, really. Not necessarily in our immediate environment, but what we had been seeing trending overall. And the event technologist role plays a heavy part in helping to onboard these new advancements to the overall attendee experience. And kind of an offshoot to this, what we're seeing certainly in reaction to the current times, and Taylor's been talking about this, is that the event technologists are also stepping up to the plate and stepping up quickly and adapting the, you know, in-person event programs to leverage event management technology and some other integrated technologies to create a virtual environment, a virtual experience, an overall virtual event as a means to continue our face-to-face connectivity, even when it means we can't be right beside one another right now. So, you know, Taylor in a lot of ways has become, and the event technologist in general, has become a linchpin to the success of those programs. And without that strategist, we're seeing immobilization and, you know, kind of taking longer to hit a stride on these types of decisions, just because the data and the technology literacy isn't there in-house. You're having to go and talk to people outside of your meetings and events team to try to understand what does it mean to actually pivot to virtual, as we've been seeing. All right, number five, the hospitality industry is also a driving force in their embracing of this personalization in their own experiences. So I think I've even seen like Alexa being rolled out in some of the in-room experiences. I know they're getting really creative in the hospitality and tourism space on how to hyper-personalize the not only group business experiences, but even like the consumer side of the house too. So that's also rubbing off on our meetings and events programs. But at the same time, it's funny because we're also seeing a simplification and what we refer to as the consumerization of these advanced technologies. So that at one time, a lot of these, you know, SaaS companies seemed so inaccessible to a planner. You know, you really felt like you needed to have the IT department managing a lot of this stuff. Now we're seeing that you know, these enterprise type SaaS organizations are so much more easily adapted within the organization. And now that's rubbing off on the planning function, so that we're specializing, but need way, way less sophistication of the team than what we once had. And that's really in part due to the simplification of the technologies themselves. I think we've touched on this in so many ways already, but number 7, with the more technologies comes more to master. Many organizations are dividing and conquering, bringing in, SWAT teams to take on the registration experience, the mobile app experience, or the on-site, for example, which is a similar approach to how we're somewhat handling our own technologies, or at least attempting to get there within our own organizational framework. I think we pretty much covered this in the previous slide too, but just to put a finer point on it, with more technology, you have more interactivity options. And so the world really is your oyster when it comes to this. And if you're interested in the technology piece, you really are playing an integral role in the overall attendee experience. You're not just behind the scenes playing with tech and data. You really are influencing how the experience translates to on-site or in a virtual environment for that matter.
Perfect. So kind of dive into the profile of an event technologist. I think Alyssa really summed up those the trends, and let's dive into the profile here. So when we ask who is the event technologist, covered what is it, what is that role? Let's get into what they look like, and we talked about this a little bit. You'll notice the common kind of thread here, just like that. The event planner, this role of the event technologist, they wear so many hats. I'll get into actually some specifics on this on the next slide, but really the role is easily thrown to the wolves, so to speak. Once people kind of realize and see you as a technology expert, a lot will be thrown at you because there is a lot of unknown, and I think a lot of people are, it's a little daunting for some people. For me, in fact, it's definitely taken some time to sort of define the line and weed out that gray area of what my role does do and what my role does not do. It's easy to find yourself manually adding sessions into an event and kind of just doing quick things, but you really have to step back and become that strategic voice like Alyssa talked about, and making sure that you are driving strategy and driving that ROI, not just doing things day to day. So another thing I think that's big is the event technologist has to be really agile. We hear this word a lot in the events industry, but it is so true for the event technologist role. You have to be ready for just change at the drop of a hat, pun intended on that this slide here with the hats. Especially looking at our current kind of global position, we've definitely had to make some pretty rapid changes. I know you guys can probably all resonate with that. And so I know times are kind of weird for everyone right now, and I see personally myself not as just vital, but really a leader in this time as the event technologist, because we really can use technology to help us drive our events program, not just say, okay, we kind of have to put a hold on things in person, that's it. No, we can step up and say, hey, here's what we can be doing to continue keeping that brand relevant for our attendees and our customers, to continue driving our leads or whatever it is that our goals are for that event program. Keeping your attendees engaged, whatever those goals are. So that's kind of the profile, and I'll get into. I love this slide because it is a lot. It just kind of speaks to the role of what your event technologist could look like and just how extensive it can be. Obviously, there's a lot on this page, and it pretty accurately describes the role itself. Now, keep in mind, this list is going to look probably completely different depending on your organization, your industry, the specific event that the person is working on, et cetera. But ultimately, the event technologist should kind of be the driver of this list. They should be the ones recommending of if there's a new platform, they should add that to their list. If there is a new technology that needs to be rolled out, they would add that to the list themselves, that type of thing. They should be bringing new ideas to the team, recommending new solutions and features, and definitely keeping up with new trends. That is more relevant now than ever. Keeping up to date on what other organizations are doing, what other events are doing, kind of being the one that's up on those trends. I think, honestly, one of the most important items on this list, if not the most important, is actually the last one on that bottom right-hand side, which is kind of onboarding for platforms. Personally, getting my users and my team members to champion a new technology or a solution is the most challenging. It is hard. You have to constantly remind them of the importance of using technology and kind of embed that in their brains. We all know a lot of times planners are problem solvers. That's what they are at heart. They want to just kind of get in, get it done, and be on their way. A lot of times event tech can fall to the wayside with that. So reminding them that, hey, we want to make sure we get reporting out of this. Hey, we want to make sure we see the ROI. Don't forget. So I think that one on the bottom right is probably one of the more challenging because it does involve getting people on board with you. So I like this slide, though, because it does kind of show just how much can be done. Okay, moving into success metrics. When we ask the question of how do event technologists measure success, it's going to look very different for an event technologist than it is to a planner. Planners are really evaluated on attendance goals, staying on or under budget, and some other event objectives. These might be dependent on your overall event program goals. On the flip side, technologists really rely on technology to deliver engagement and adoption success metrics. So for example, mobile app downloads, number of registrations processed, survey response rates, tickets sold, participation in various activations, a whole host of detailed data on that attendee journey. That's kind of what we look at. We look at the end-to-end from marketing the event at the beginning all the way down to post-event engagement. And really, moreover, they're going to be responsible for relaying a lot of that data to the events team and ultimately executives. And one of the big things is taking that data and not just saying, here are the numbers. It's translating it. Storytelling, as I like to say. You're actually creating a story out of that data and saying, okay, here is something that we can make an actionable, make a decision based off of. This session was low attendance after a heavy lunch. Like that's the type of stuff you need to start telling the story on. Another piece that I've personally started developing is kind of just zingers for my own role. I like to call them that. It's a technical term. Some of the examples I've kind of come up with, and to be honest, Alyssa has really helped me kind of hone in on this type of stuff, is things that I can kind of bring to the table and say, hey, here's what I've accomplished in my role. So one example would be that we rolled out, let's say, Cvent Flex at our most recent flagship event before 99% of customers did, that type of thing. And so those are kind of the zingers that I like to just showcase myself. And I think we all kind of need to do that, especially in this environment of just giving ourselves a little pat on the back. So I think that comes in handy.
Oh, sorry. Taylor and I are fighting for the next button. All right, so a big question that we have here, and I think a lot of you are probably in this boat, is if your team is ready for an event technologist, or maybe you're actually thinking you are one already, do you hire someone full-time or you're on your team? Do you define it a little bit more, or do you outsource that role? And the spoiler alert here is there is no right answer. So we're going to take a kind of more critical look at some reasons for doing either of the two. All right, so this has been a major initiative for our own team. So for years, Cvent had been reliant on external resources that actually, oddly enough, sat in our own client services team, but they weren't internal to our meetings and events function. And that team, that client services outsourced group, was helping us support an events ecosystem of over 1,000 events a year. And so though this got us by, for reasons that we kind of noted previously, some serious decisions came into the fold where we needed more dedicated and strategic and integrated players onto our team. So one of the big advantages of pulling those resources in-house is so that person can really fully devote themselves to your organization, to your culture, to your goals, and to your normal day-to-day, or how your company or your department does business. They really get to sink their teeth into the ins and outs, the pain points, and the areas for improvement, effectively becoming true strategic drivers. And I think there's no greater testament to this than what I've seen happen with Taylor and her career. She was one of those outsourced players that we brought in-house so that she could help really amplify the strategy that she was already kind of helping while she sat, across the way. I was going to say over the cubicle from us. But her autonomy and her control of our own specific 1,000 events a year portfolio has grown exponentially as she's actually seated with us now, as opposed to just a resource that we could use whenever we need it. So Taylor, I wanted you to be able to comment on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I started as a outsource position, if you will. That sounds so weird saying it, but I always kind of struggled with not being able to just truly sink my teeth into the goals and that hopeful outcomes of the planning team. There is always that learning curve of an organization. So I really wanted to dive in. I think event technologists are also really central to shifts being made to the event programs. I know we've kind of touched on this, but when you have a centralized system that's your record of your events program, like that 1,000 event portfolio we have, you really can provide the business with the information it needs to make changes. So rather than just coming in for one or two of those flagship events, maybe an internal event or two, you can actually own the whole kind of experience and speak to it from a larger perspective. But yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with that. And then, there's obviously reasons for an outsourced position too.
Yes, of course. And I think we'd be remiss not to talk about that either, because, there's the other side of the coin where outsourcing may be a better avenue for your organization, for your events program maturity, for your meeting and event team maturity. And I see outsourcing, and clearly we were in that position for a really long time, right? We finally bit the bullet to start bringing resources in-house because we needed total control of those technologies and to take a more integrated approach. But outsourcing was really good for us for a long time, where we had uncertainty. We were trying new event programs. We were truthfully lacking funding for new heads. And at the time, we did have enough heads to justify the spend, but in some organizations, there may not be budget for that. So hiring kind of a temporary resource to get you through, but who does have subject matter area of expertise, can be a really great way to kind of amplify what you're doing and to serve the pain point. But like we said, it really completely depends on the size of your organization, the events program overall, and then those goals. So it's definitely something to consider, and looking at your overall program maturity.
And I would say neither is a bad option. I think it just completely depends on, all the above. Okay. So I know we have definitely enticed you to become an event technologist. We will take a look at just some steps or some kind of ideas just to kind of kickstart if you are interested in exploring the realm of event technology. Let me dive in. Perfect. So a couple of steps or ideas here. Just learn some technology. Honestly, we see this day in and day out. There are so many people that are terrified of new technology and not knowing and not being sure about how it works. So just become an expert or kind of an expert user on one or a couple of solutions. Maybe they're ones that your organization already uses. Even, I'll be honest with you, even becoming a Zoom or WebEx or, virtual web provider, that is a huge asset. Or you can even start discovering some new ones and become an advocate for it. So Cvent, for example, we have our certification programs where you can become Cvent certified. We have a handful of them, and actually we are doing a promo right now where they're completely free. So definitely take a look at that. So that's one thing. You could become Cvent certified, add it to your resume. Our whole team is Cvent certified, which is amazing. Go in and play around. If you're a Cvent customer already, go into your account, build out a test event, build out a mobile app, just kind of click around and play around. Another one that you could look at is if you are really going to take it to the next level and play out this event technologist role, write out a job description for the position, whether it's just an additional layer on your already full plate of things. Just make sure you're kind of defining the expectations and responsibilities of the event technologist. Bring it to your manager or your leadership team, show your organization what it would look like, and it will ultimately, it'll show them how serious you are. I actually wrote out the role for myself. I wrote out all the bullet points of the responsibilities and the expectations. So it's a good exercise to do, honestly. And you'll definitely want to work on your project management skills. That's number 3 down there. That is a huge component of this role. By no means do you need to be a master, but it is really helpful for making sure that your team's meeting those timelines, making sure that you're leading the team. We all know there's times where you kind of have to speak up and push people, herd the cats, as I like to say, making sure you're reaching that successful ROI and getting those event metrics. And lastly, just step up and ask. A lot of times you think that it's being handled, or you think that it's just not something that your organization's interested in. And that's usually not the case. Usually the events team or marketing team, depending on where your team falls under, usually they just need someone who can champion that event technology. But maybe they don't have time to formally hire one. So that's when we kind of talk about the outsourcing, or really just hiring and taking it on internally. So speak up, volunteer, learn some tech, and kind of dive in. A big thing here that I have learned and that I will continue to preach is just do not be afraid of technology. There is so much demand for this role, especially now. Even just having that technical expertise is crazy in demand right now. Own it and just have fun with it. There's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of room for change. Obviously, the world is changing. And to be honest with you, the best thing to do is be on board and be familiar with technology, because it is coming. And you can ultimately lead the pack with those changes, which is exciting. All right, let me move into, I'll kind of go through this one quickly. These are just 6 responsibilities of a well-rounded event technologist. The big one, obviously, event technology management. You think that's it, but there's really a lot more. And of course, these could vary depending on the role that you define for your specific person. But you might be involved in vendor review management and writing out that RFP. You might definitely be involved in the registration and website component of it, project managing that and meeting timelines. Number 4 is probably the biggest one, is analyzing that data and making sure that that's what you're doing everything for, is to get good numbers out of everything, being able to prove that ROI. Research and development, that kind of ties into what I was saying earlier about staying up with trends, staying up with any new technologies, and making sure that you're kind of bringing those to the table. And then lastly, on-site support. It seems like such a small piece, but it's definitely an important one, being there on site just to kind of move into these different components as things happen, which we all know they do. Okay. I think we are going to jump into questions. This was just the last quick slide here just to show you. There is some more information. I know a couple people asked about it in the chat. There is some other information on the study that Cvent did conduct with Event MB. Those were those stats we gave out, but these are some of the resources that we do have. We actually have our full ebook, which is The Rise of the Event Technologist, which has a lot of really cool stuff in it, and we're calling it binge-worthy. We're very trendy here, so we'll definitely encourage you guys to check those out. I think we'll go ahead and open it up for questions now.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. That was really magnificent. Preaching the need to have an event technologist. I think anybody that knows when something goes wrong, you wish you had the person who can say, how do we fix this? The first question that we have is, what should an event technologist own everything, including AV and the content issues that arise with it? Is that technology, or is that content creation? I guess Taylor is the best one of this, right?
Yeah, that's a fun one. Honestly, we kind of deal with this at our organization too. I will say, I think in some organizations this works. I'll be honest, obviously the role is still evolving, so it might fall in line. I think ultimately the role is going to be involved in some way. I personally, I'll say Cvent Connect, our flagship event, I do not own the AV part of the house. We actually have a dedicated planner for that. But I'm definitely involved. I'm definitely looped in and aware of what's going on, because everything ties together, right? What is the AV for? It's for breakout sessions. Where do breakout sessions live? They might live in your registration site. They might live in your call for papers. They're going to live kind of in all different areas of the event technology realm. So you're going to be involved one way or another. It depends on the organization, I would say. Alyssa, I don't know if you have anything to add onto that.
Yeah, I think there are going to be technology areas of expertise even under historical planning functions, which I think AV has been part of it. So just because we're saying, like, sometimes this isn't a dedicated role, it's kind of a niche function you perform, but understanding AV requirements and things like that are part of these are functions that fall under the event technologist umbrella. Like, I think there's an agreement that, like, that is a tech savvy role. If that ends up getting relegated to a dedicated resource that's on that, or if it's just a functional need that a planner has to support, I think what we're advocating here is that technology proficiency becomes part of the wheelhouse, essentially.
So I have another question: is how many different specialists or technologists do you recommend? I mean, I know that in the event industry used to have, okay, here's a planner. Now you have planners that do all different aspects. What do you see as the future specialties that, as this breaks down even more?
I can talk to that too, because
sure.
I've been kind of at the helm of building the teams. Right now, and again, this is 100% dependent on your scope and scale of your organization. So if you don't have a large user conference or things like that, you might not need certain elements that I'm about to talk about here. But the areas of specialty we've seen, at least within the Cvent platform, are registration specialists that are responsible for like event build logic. So when you have complex registration flows, and I mean, some conferences we've seen upwards of 30 tabs and 50 to 60 registration types. So that hyper personalization and working alongside your planning and your marketing groups, we definitely see the need for that, like, logic builder to play a significant role. Mobile app is a separate discipline that's kind of leans more on like the user interface, user connectivity. That's a function. We've also seen kind of the on-site experiences, so managing and tracking what's going on within an event space, that being a separate role. And then I was kind of mentioning earlier on the call, Taylor really helps us to create synergies between all of those specialists. So those are hyper-targeted specialists. Taylor understands data flow throughout an entire system. But those are kind of the three I would say have been like the big priority three. And then there are other smaller functional subsets like building appointments for facilitation of meetings, which you may have more dedicated need for in an organization. For example, I know financial industry is very reliant on appointments as a technology. But again, it's really dependent on what the purpose of your events is, what technologies you need to support them, and how data flows and works and weaves in between all of those things, and how you have to set up those players. And in part why we find that this is still so emerging, because the technologies are still in development.
Do you see that that we always have that big question for like the last 40 years I've ever been doing this, the ROI question comes into question. Where does that sit? Does the technology, the technologist should be a really big part of understanding the analysis and understanding how to sort of bring everything together to find out if this event is working on either a technological basis, but also using the overall data points to create something. Is that true or not? Would you expect that eventually from this department?
Possibly. Taylor, I don't know if you want to comment on that from the reporting side of things. I definitely do, as the marketer, lean into technology savvy resources, Taylor included in that. We also have an analytics team, so like that Cvent is probably a different case here. But I lean into those subject matter experts who have data literacy within meetings and events specifically to help prove and track ROI. But that's also merged with spend data, which historically is in the budgeting and spend conversation, which is historically managed very, very closely and tightly with the traditional planning role. So it's really kind of a brain trust of people that come together to talk about how much we're spending, how much revenue we're generating, pulling all those data sources through the technologist role, and then understanding what does this mean for our organization.
Yeah. I would say it definitely drives the decisions being made by the event technologists and the recommendations. It might be something as small as changing the fields that you collect in registration because you want to be able to report on them differently at the end. You'll hear I ask that question like to a fault. I'm like, don't forget about reporting. How do we want to report on this? How do we want to see the numbers at the end? So it certainly comes into play with the recommendations. So you can't just, I saw someone ask this in the chat of like how early to bring in the event technologist, and really like out of the gate. The person needs to be involved from the get-go because they need to understand what the goals are of the event. They need to understand what the pain points are that the team is going to run into, the stakeholders involved, the different players, because we all know in an ideal world, the planner would be the one driving the goals, but that's not ever really how it is. It's a bunch of different stakeholders. It might be your sales execs that have one goal. It might be your CEO that has completely different goals, and then your marketing folks might have completely different goals. And by might, I mean definitely. So taking that all into consideration and being able to make recommendations off of all of that. So getting that person involved from the get-go, they should really be on that core group of folks. We always call ours a core committee. They should sit on that committee for sure.
Oh, great. So here's a big question that I've been hearing from everybody over the last few weeks. What platforms are the most used for virtual webinars and virtual meetings and virtual events? What do you guys see?
I can speak broadly, and then I can give a wrong answer and a right answer. I'm going to start with the wrong answer. The wrong answer is Zoom and what else? WebEx. I mean, like these are like the big providers, right? Who else are we seeing, Taylor? Zoom,
oh gosh,
WebEx,
On24 maybe, yeah.
Those are like the big probably players in the space. But before you ask that question, and here's the right answer, before we get to what technologies are supporting anything, we need to be talking about the goals and the scope and the user experience for an event that we're looking to host and create. So not all virtual events are created equal. And it certainly when you're pivoting to virtual, your conference or your event scope could look vastly different from the in-person experience to what should be facilitated in a virtual environment. And so without having that conversation about goals and scope and user experience, it makes the purchasing process and the research phase really, really difficult. Certainly the technologies can help shape that scope a little bit, but I think that those are strategic conversations that need to be had within the organization to help guide and shape the technologies that you end up investing in or end up leveraging that might possibly already exist within your organization. So that's, I think
Alyssa,
that's
something you just said made me think of when you said, can you imagine, getting a piece of technology without scoping it out? It's kind of similar to finding a venue without knowing what your attendee experience is. We keep comparing it to that. So your virtual space is really your venue. So can you imagine planning let's say it's a networking happy hour and you get the largest ballroom in a hotel? Why would you, that attendee experience is going to be weird. So you kind of scope it out
Absolutely.
that same exact way.
I had a very similar epiphany as I was talking. So it is very much this.
Told you we like to talk a lot.
You build an RFP with that framework in mind. So virtual should be part of that. But certainly then consider these providers that are top in the space. I see that this platform is leveraging Intrado, I think, which is also another great provider. And Cvent is just a conduit to help you access some of these providers.
Do you think that what we're all experiencing in the last few weeks, the Zooms and things like that, sort of all the pictures on the screen of the people talking, do you think that will eventually become kind of like when we talk about death by PowerPoint? It's going to be too similar and too sort of boring, so we're going to have to come up with some new mousetraps for this? Or do you think that technology is going to be accepted as sort of the best of class?
I don't know. I find that very interesting too, because I have been kind of just spying the chat as this has been going on, and it's been really interesting to see the expectations of the room almost wanting the live presenter view based off of the current climate of having live presenter. I don't know if I can predict that right now. I'd like to say that virtual events are now going to become I think our webinar events are going to be amplified, and I think we're going to be tested in our webinar environments as a result of our post kind of COVID era that we're in. I do think that we're going to see some changes, or at least some creativity that's being infused into the virtual user experience that we didn't previously see because we hadn't been tested on it.
Do you think
I don't
think
know.
that
That's my own conjecture.
Do you think technologists will be able to keep up on the flexibility of how things are changing so quickly? It's a lot of times you design a system and you're spending hours and years to design it, and then it looks like, even Zoom is changing. How people are using it is changing.
I have a feeling, if I was to put on my best trends hat, that there will be some consolidation efforts and lessons learned out of all of this kind of virtual flurry, because we've noticed, just as I'm sure you guys have noticed, that there are so many different user experiences, and some work and some don't, and some are successful and some aren't. And I think this will, I think that the cream of the crop is going to rise to the top, essentially. And we're going to start to have a standard in virtual event experiences that will come to be the norm or come to be the expectation. But I do think that we will continue to see more virtual events in more streamlined fashions of consumption.
Do you think that, this is an interesting question for me, is that, do you think that virtual events, a lot of times people are saying, let's just take our regular traditional event and turn it into a virtual, and then have a day of conferences and a day of this and a day of that. Our attention spans are not that good online. Any sort of technology
as an
notes
event
on
marketer,
this?
Yeah, so that's basically my role here in our strategy, right? We have to make sure that what we do in our in-person event serves an objective and a need, and it's doing something for our organization. I don't think your virtual event objectives should be the same as your in-person event objectives, or they can be the same objectives, but you have to support them or give your users or your attendees a completely different way of achieving those objectives for your organization. So no, I have said this, I've been on record saying this on several calls. I do not believe you can just pivot a one-to-one relationship with a in-person event and just put it online. I don't think the engagement or the attention span is there, certainly not in this current climate. We have so many things that are being thrown at us. Whether it's at home life, being on top of our work life, we don't have the time to dedicate, and nor do we want to be sitting at our screens. The attention span at an in-person event is vastly, vastly, vastly different than what a virtual event experience could look like. And with that's me basically saying in-person will still be here to stay when the dust settles from this. But I do think that there are interesting ways to appeal to a virtual audience and supplement in-person experiences, but in the right fashion, in a strategic way. And I just like, that's the word here, is strategic. It's got to be a strategic and conscious decision.
Yeah, I just wrote an article on how a new possibility of meetings and events will involve technologists in a big way. I call it the hub and spoke method, where you have hundreds of venues that are working together to create a conference of a couple thousand people, because you can put them in groups of 10 in hotel rooms, but all of the technology and has to be connected in a way that the bridge really works really well. So the technologist is going to be more important than ever. So my question is, how do you, everyone seems to want to figure out how to create these virtual events, but having that event technologist either on your staff or at your hands, at your beck and call, will make a huge difference, because I'm noticing so many people having such challenges making decisions on which platform to go with and what to do. It's a gut check at the end of the day without the knowledge. How do you advise
Absolutely.
people listening?
The other trends that I really do think that I'm optimistic that will come out of this, and it's in part due to like my background as a traditional marketer that now kind of chokes the line between meetings and events and demand generation, is the convergence of planning and marketing functions. Well, I'm seeing, even in our own organization and in others, planners leaning into their marketing counterparts a little bit more heavily, not kind of siloing themselves like they felt in the past, but more so having to lean into the resources that are leveraged by the marketing department, or the traditional marketing department or the demand generation team. which are, they usually have technologies for hosting webinars, for hosting virtual events. Planners understand the logistics that are supported. So bringing those individuals together, I think, is going to be a really positive outcome, that really truly the convergence of those two functions in the organization.
And so Taylor, I guess this is probably a question for Taylor. Let's say you're sitting and listening today and you've been laid off, you've been furloughed or something like this, and you want to reinvent yourself. What's the first step? You mentioned a little bit about it, that you've got all this time in your hands now. You want to be an event technologist. What do you just sort of sign up for, like you could do a course, you could do something, but it's digging in on something and become an expert, you said. But where do you go? How do you do this? How does someone sitting in that room that said, oh my God, I've just been shocked because the economy is a mess. I need to reinvent myself. The world is not going to be what it is. What do you do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there is so much out there right now, and Alyssa touched on this earlier too. Like, I feel like I'm being bombarded with ads and stuff on every company, everything that I've ever even thought of. So there is a lot out there right now, but that's such a good and powerful thing. Even just hopping on LinkedIn is a great resource just to see what people are talking about. People are like dying to talk to people right now. We see that. People are like so eager to just have that face-to-face connection, possibly away from their families, if you know what I mean. No, but people are just so eager to kind of talk to people and get that professional conversation going. So hopping on LinkedIn, seeing what's going on. Cvent has, we're offering our free certifications, which are normally like upwards of $500. So that's a huge resume booster. That's a huge way to just take advantage of this and keep going, not just sitting back and kind of letting this wash over. Because I think I definitely felt that when this first started, happening, we felt that, oh my gosh, that angst and that, oh, this is so painful, this is such a change. You just got to like take the bull by the horns and kind of run with it. Be that person and be suggesting stuff, even if it's something as simple as, hey, I was on this webinar today about event technology and I heard some really cool stuff. Just starting those conversations with colleagues. You never know who might be a resource to you or someone who might end up being a future connection. And then Cvent also has our support community where you can hop in and network with other event professionals, which is really cool. So there's a lot out there right now. I would honestly say I hate being a plug for my own company, but Cvent's been a really great place to come together and maintain that conversation. We know that this is a tough time for everyone, so we're there with you. We're going to get through this. We're going to be better for it. So, yeah.
Dig in a little bit on the Cvent, the idea of taking the Cvent qualification to be registered, and how does someone go about doing it, and how much time does it take? Like, what kind of investment is it? Instead of watching Netflix, you could probably end up doing it?
Kind of depends. If you have background in it, you probably could take the certification. You basically are flexing your Cvent user knowledge and making sure that you're a advanced enough user to pass the certification. If you're brand new, there are trainings you can actually take for free right now, which is crazy. We've never done this before, giving you access to an account where you can actually hop in, play around, and click around and build an event. Add that to your resume. Seriously, pile that stuff on your resume. Use this as a time to do all those things that you had on your to-do list that you haven't done before. Like if you were going to start looking at different learnings and different areas, like put that stuff on your resume. Don't just kind of sit back and let it. But yeah, it depends. It could take, the certification itself, I think, is an hour and a half, the exam component, but it could take, you could train for a couple days. You could take the certification right out the gate. It's kind of up to you.
Well, let me do a plug for that. As the CEO of a company for 20 years, back when I just started, in order to understand registration, I got heavily into understanding how to do Cvent myself. And it has saved my life in the future because I knew what questions to ask my event technologist. And they would say, oh, what about this? Because that was the number one question that I was able to ask to people that work for me. And then you have so much more knowledge. So I would want everybody to sort of use this time to dig deeper into your field.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Knowledge is power, and now more than ever.
Yeah.
So unless, Alyssa or Taylor, do you have any final comments before we say goodbye to everyone?
No, thank you so much. This was a really engaging and awesome conversation. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as we did.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. It was so insightful. It was a great presentation. This will be available on demand. I know we had some early issues with some sound for some people. You need to have your own event technologist to help you. And it'll be on demand, and it'll be emailed to you. And so thank you for joining us. We at BizBash are so appreciative of all the people working on our industry, and this is the time to reach out and give a virtual hug to everybody, because we're in the business of connecting people. So thank you so much for being part of our group. With that, we're signing off.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.